Today, the committee has our regular meeting outside of session to hear updates from the executive branch. We will hear several presentations to update us on revenues, federal relief spending, transformational activities, and state health insurance plans. And so I guess maybe before I do anything else, I need to call a roll. Or do I need to? We're not gonna have any votes. Okay, we'll pass by that. August revenue report, we're gonna call on the Honorable Stephen E. Cummins, Secretary of Finance. Good morning.
Good morning. Madam Chair. Thank you all for letting me come and present today. I am going to present on August monthly results. As you will see, August is a very quiet month. Low revenue receipts outside of our core, most important of withholding and sales and use taxes. So I will move through this quickly and then leave adequate time for questions. So despite having one fewer day than in August of last year, revenues increased 2% year over year in the month. For the first 2 months combined, we're up 8% over prior year. August, like July, is another low revenue month, as I have said, consisting mainly of payroll withholding and sales tax. It is not a significant month for other sources, such as corporate income and non-withholding taxes. The two main sources that I described, withholding and sales and use, account for over 90% of the revenues for the month. That's relative to closer to 80% for the full year, so you can see the small representation. Compared to the forecast, which accounts for the reduced number of deposit days, revenues exceeded projections for the month by $114 million, and for year-to-date, it's $205.7 million. I think it's very important for everybody to remember that the official revenue forecast that we are using for FY 2025 is from the 2024 Appropriation Act, Chapter 2, which was signed into law May 13th. And that only thing revised in that was the revenues for FY 2024 that was completed in the conclusion of the budget cycle, which added the $500+ million to last year. So we're still working with FY 2025 from the December forecast of last year. So that means that our forecast still reflects the economic and revenue outlooks developed in the fall of 2023, and it's unchanged except for adjustments directly tied to legislative actions that are included in the budget, which amounts to about $30 million, so very small impact in that. That forecast, as you know, will be updated this fall as part of the normal forecasting and budget development process. Among the major sources, payroll withholding taxes are 1.3% lower year over year for the month, again reflecting the one less deposit day. Year to date, they're up 6.1% for the first 2 months. Compared to the forecast, which accounts for there being one less deposit day in our forecasting process, we are ahead of forecast by $158 million year to date. August non-withholding collections increased 53.4% year over year. Year to date are $100.1 million. Again, you're going to see large percentage changes in these other smaller categories, and that simply is because the gross amounts are quite low. Sales taxes, one of our steady important sources that is not affected by being an off-cycle month. Sales taxes increased 1.8% in August and are up 2.2% year to date. And versus the forecast, they are up $21.1 million. Net corporate income tax collections were negative $15.2 million for the month, reflecting refund activity in a month when few corporate taxpayers submit any estimated payments. So that's relative to a small overall balance. On a year-to-date basis, corporate income tax revenues are 63% below last year, $43.9 million. Because September results will be when the first quarterly payments are due from individuals and corporations, which will be a substantial month of revenues, that will give us a much better outlook on where we stand year to date. Turning to the economy, in summary here, the broader economy, as we all know, continues to chug along. Consumers continue to spend, inflation is nearing the Fed's target, and employment growth, while still positive, continues to slow. Real GDP for the U.S. was revised upward slightly last month to 3% annual rate in the second calendar quarter of 2024. The big news is that the Fed is widely expected to lower interest rates at its meeting tomorrow, so stay tuned at 2 p.m. In remarks last month, Fed Chair Powell expressed confidence that inflation is under control, close to the central bank's 2% target, suggesting that rate cuts are imminent, and it emphasized the Fed's intent to focus on maintaining a strong labor market. The debate is currently not if you listen to the various business channels or read in the paper, it is actually how much of a rate cut. The current fixed income market betting odds are 70% that we'll actually see 50 basis point reduction, which would be a very significant statement that they want to stay ahead of a softening job market. So that's actually a very important market signal tomorrow. Headline Consumer Price Index for all items fell to 2.5% in August. The year-over-year percentage increase in core CPI, excluding food and energy, remained at 3.2%, and the 12-month percentage change in core personal consumer expenditure price index, PCE, which is the primary data point that the Fed looks at, is at 2.6% in July. U.S. added 142,000 jobs in August, a very good number, but clearly slowing. We'll have more on that in a minute. And July is the last month we have data for Virginia employment, and we added 4,800 jobs in that month, a 2% year-over-year increase. Looking at GDP here on this next slide, you can see in the second quarter it came in at 3%, according to revised estimates, more than double the rate of growth in the first quarter. Importantly, the consumer continues to hold up and was the largest contributor to GDP at 1.9% percentage points contributed to GDP growth. Recent data shows an uptick in consumer sentiment. It's albeit at lower rates than we've seen previously, but indicate better confidence in the economy. Here's the chart on inflation you've seen for some time now. We'll not spend time on this. Continuing to trend down, and I think everybody, most importantly, Chair Powell has indicated that they feel comfortable that inflation has been controlled. U.S. job growth continues to slow. It's clearly the market is cooling, but it is definitely not fallen out. Non-farm payrolls rose by 142,000 in August, weaker than expectations, but a welcome improvement from July. Revisions, as you probably read, have been significant. And so this is much talk about the quality of the data that we've been getting for some time. We'll talk about that more in a bit. Importantly, the number of open jobs also continue to decline. So these are the data points that the Fed is watching that indicate that we are definitely seeing things cool off and wanting to make sure we don't let that get out of control. This chart talks about the adjustments, which you've been reading a lot about. It's caused some doubt in the quality of the data we've been receiving for some time. You can see that after revisions, we had down at the bottom a reduction in U.S. total non-farm of 818,000 jobs, 0.5% in Virginia, a much smaller percentage of reduction. There's a lot of debate on this. The number that just came out of the new jobs in the last month of 142,000, people are saying, well, we can't rely on that. It's probably going to get revised down. I think probably that's a safe bet. The reality is that there's a lot of statistical analysis that goes into it. It's well beyond just job counts. This is from the establishment survey, but it is not unusual in a declining job market that you have consistent job reductions in these estimates, and we're going to hear more about it over the course of the year as that gets completed for the following year, as they are revised at least one more time, if not two. So Virginia actually continues to hold up quite well relative to the U.S. Job employment increased by 4,800, increase of 2%. Private sector employment increased by 5,300. Well, government employment was only 500 of that, which is encouraging because the jobs came primarily out of leisure and hospitality and professional and business services, which are two very important sectors for the economy of Virginia. June's preliminary estimate of employment was revised downward by 9,500, And our unemployment rate continues to stay at a significant gap from where the U.S. is, indicating the strength of the Virginia economy. This is something that we're now going to watch much more closely as we're seeing job openings and jobs cool off, which is jobless claims. No alarm bells on this chart right now. You can see the history of where we stand on the left-hand side of the chart, going back to 2009. So on the far right, once we got through the pandemic, we are still well below historical standards. On the right is blowing up the box that is highlighted on the left-hand slide. And we are about 20% over year increases of claims. But again, no alarms going off. You won't hear people talking about it, but clearly something that we are watching. And we are working closely with Secretary Slater and his team to make sure we have very current data in Virginia. Very importantly, consumer spending continues to stay solid. We had a chance to spend some time with President Barkin from the Richmond Fed and had a little teach-in before he had to go into blackout before the announcements tomorrow. And this is one of the most important factors he highlighted, is the ongoing strength of the consumer in our economy. And they're watching that very closely. That's got to stay in a solid territory for us to feel comfortable that the economy continues to be have a positive momentum. Home sales, we need to go back farther because I think we all know home sales are down dramatically since COVID and even down further more recently. We are seeing here in the most recent data some positive uptick in home sales, but still the volume is quite low. And you can see that the average median price continues to go up. So the demand is high at the higher end, and then that I get is a positive indicator, but it doesn't suggest that we have a housing market that is robust. Turning to the numbers, revenues are dominated, as you can see, by withholding and sales taxes. If you just look up at the chart and you kind of run your eyes down the FY 2025, you can see that withholding at $1.336 billion in the month of August, sales and use taxes at almost $400 million. Those are normal numbers, albeit in August 25, we're one less collection day, which is important. It happened to be a Thursday, which is a big collection day. And so that takes some of the steam out of it. So the minus 1.3% you see for withholding, actually, if you adjusted for that, would be positive. We're not doing that here. But you can see for total revenues in August of 25 of 1.9, almost $2 billion, 1.8 of that is in sales and use and withholding revenues, and the other contributors are really quite small. One thing I want to point out, the corporate has gotten some attention lately. You can see we are now going to be breaking out in greater detail corporate with corporate gross, corporate refunds, and net corporate income tax as we watch that more closely to pick up any deviations from what would be the norm. Year to date, you can see on the right-hand side, again, that we're up 8% year over year, year to date. 2% is for the month of August. This is now versus the forecast, our projected, which again emphasizing that is a fall of 2023 forecast. And you can see here that the variance, if you go down in the August, we picked up $114 million of general fund revenues versus forecast. And year to date, we are up $206 million. Okay, sorry. I'm going to go through these quickly. This is all captured in the prior slides. We're just starting the year off, but this just reflects. You can see the forecast in the hash-marked columns. And as this builds itself out, you're going to see more and more about the trend line. Again, good news is we have positive performance to date, and this will be reset in December. Non-withholding, this is non-withholding, does not incorporate any refunds. And I think the August numbers, again, a very small month. We're going to get estimated payments coming next month. But as we saw last year, at real non-withholding, capital gains and small enterprises has been performing well beyond what we had in our projections, so we expect this will continue to be a positive performer. And now this is looking at refunds. You can see in the blue on the right-hand side, the revenue team has been tracking PTET refunds separately starting in July of last year, so we're going to have some good comparisons coming up. And I'd say, again, the numbers, they're not unimportant, but it gives you context that revenues for refunds are all happening in October, but most importantly, February, March, and April is when the real money is made, and we determine what our year is going to be like in that category. Sales tax, we are ahead, obviously, and we have a modest expectation on that. You can see on the projections, as you recall, that forecast anticipated a mild recession beginning in the latter half of FY24 and extending 6 to 9 months into FY 2025. So that's what we're working against, and right now it looks like we will comfortably exceed that, not surprisingly. And then the other sources, nothing really to comment on. Again, they are small, and I wouldn't say that there's any meaningful trend line in that. So in conclusion, it's not a significant month, always important, but not really that meaningful to the overall. Revenue's up $303 million year to date, year over year. I think more importantly, as compared to the forecast, we're up $205.7 million. Virginia continues to perform very well. I think we could feel really good about how we are performing relative to the rest of the country. Fed is comfortable, inflation's under control. It's all about jobs right now. They're watching closely, and we'll see tomorrow. And I think if it's a 50 basis point cut, it gives you a good insight into how Chair Powell the committee is thinking about this and trying to make sure that they can do their best to engineer the soft landing everybody's been praying for. Obviously, elections are going to have a significant impact on the outlook for our economy. And as we said to Gaker in our committee meeting we had with them, that we had a very robust discussion. We agreed that we wouldn't make any establish preliminary views about where the economy was going, because we'll be back together in November after the election, and we'll have a lot to talk about. That concludes my remarks, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Secretary Cummings. Members of the committee, any questions of the Secretary? Senator Favola?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary Cummings, for the presentation. I understand our unemployment rate has remained about the same, and it's lower than average. We've had some slowing of job growth, but up in Northern Virginia, I still hear from various chambers and other industry-focused groups that we have a lot of jobs that are unfilled in the technology area. Gratefully, Virginia has done a tremendously good job in investing in public education, both preschool, K through 12, and at the university level, and we've yielded some results from that. We're recognized as a state with a highly trained workforce. My question, Madam Chair, is where should we continue to invest in workforce training? Besides the cornerstones that I just talked about, there may be opportunities to target workforce training dollars so we can fill some of these unfilled, high-paying jobs in the technology sector.
Madam Chair, Senator Favola, thank you for the question. Yes, I think there's a double-edged sword to having a 2.7% unemployment rate. There aren't many people who are out looking for jobs. So that is an ongoing stress, and it just emphasizes what you're saying is we need more workers in Virginia. Frankly, the area we really focus on, we need more people to move to Virginia who are coming after those jobs. That's, I think, first and foremost is a positive. I think a lot of tools are in the toolbox about workforce development and the existing programs that we have, what's going on in higher ed, where we just completed another round of TTIP, which is the recognition of ability to add new degrees in high-demand industries, our community college system. I think a lot of things are in flight that working. It's not a snap your finger solution, but I feel, looking at the data, which again, the TTIP is the most recent thing that we've looked at, it's quite positive. There's a lot of positive movement, but it takes a long time to get through the pipeline.
Thank you for that answer. Senator Hashmi?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation, Secretary. I was just curious about the fact of the changing shifts in our public sector employment. One of your details indicates that government employment decreased by 500, and I'm curious, is that decrease because of folks leaving our public sector to go into private sector or retirements, or is it because we've eliminated those government jobs?
I have to get back to you. I'm not exactly sure. I don't believe the data, we have data of where people who the reductions have come out of, about where they've gone, and also the details of the state and local. I don't have that data. I know we can get that and would be happy to follow up with you.
Okay, yes, thank you. I'm especially curious if we have eliminated jobs.
Yeah,
and that's why
I'm
we're
not
seeing
aware
a
of anything
decrease.
at the state level. We'd have to look at local.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you, Secretary Cummings. Senator Marsden?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Retail sales seem to be still good, but how is the something I'm always interested in is the credit card situation in terms of credit card debt. How does that seem to be trending?
Madam Chair, Senator Marsden, thank you. It actually is pretty much the same as we said last year. They're watching it, talking to the Cap One folks. There are delinquencies that have been rising, but not a real alarm of duration of 60, 90 days and charge-offs. There was an article about JP Morgan I read yesterday where the same kind of information, that people are clearly on alert watching it. It's like us watching unemployment claims. We're watching it, but it has not ticked over a level that is people have deemed to be problematic.
Any further questions of the Secretary? Thank you, Secretary
Thank you
Cummings.
very much.
Our next presenter will be Amanda Simpson from the, she will be giving a presentation on the federal COVID relief expenditure update. And Amanda Simpson is the Director of Compliance, Oversight, and Federal Reporting, Department of Accounts.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Today I'm going to go over, give you a reminder about the federal SLFRF dollars received by Virginia, the purpose and allowed uses of those dollars, and give you an update as to where Virginia is with our obligations and expenditures through June 30th, which is the latest data available at this time. And we'll talk a little bit about the redirection of those unobligated funds at a certain point, and then give you a comparison of Virginia to other states. The State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, or SLFRF, under the American Rescue Plan Act, is the largest and most flexible pot of federal funding. DOA is monitoring all state agency expenditures from the $4.3 billion SLFRF allocation from the ARPA fund. And we are supporting all of those agencies to make sure and remind them to obligate their funds by the deadline set forth by U.S. Treasury and by Virginia's legislature. A reminder as to how these funds can be used. You'll see here on this slide that it was used to, or it continues to be used to respond to the far-reaching public health and negative economic impacts of the pandemic. It provided for premium pay for essential workers. We invested in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, as well as supporting emergency relief from natural disasters, surface transportation projects, and it also can support Title I projects. You'll see there at the bottom that the funds have to be obligated per U.S. Treasury by December 31 of 24 and expended by December 31 of 26. And just to specify internal, I will say Virginia level accelerated obligation deadlines, we have an accelerated deadline for non-capital projects of October 31st of 24. and December 1st of 24 for capital projects. And this was laid out in Chapter 2, Item 472. Expenditure categories were provided by U.S. Treasury for reporting purposes, but this gives a look into what expenditure categories Virginia was able to allocate funds towards. Now, number 8, 9, and 10, which is the emergency relief, the surface transportation projects, and Title I projects, those uses were approved in the Consolidated Appropriations Act in December of 23 when it amended the SLFRF program, but the Commonwealth did not allocate funds under those new categories. We allocated funds under categories 1 through 7 on your screen. The greatest amount we allocated was $1.7 billion towards negative economic impacts, services to respond to the negative economic impacts of the pandemic, including households, small businesses, nonprofits, and impacted industries. Here on this graphic, you'll see that out of Virginia's $4.29 billion allocated, we have budgeted or appropriated the full amount. We have reported $3.85 billion as obligated at this point and $2.63 billion as expended, and this is through June 30th of 24. We are working with 42 different state agencies who are managing 198 different projects total. We have about $441 million that remain unobligated or reported as unobligated, and roughly $1.7 billion that remains unexpended. You'll also note that 41 out of 42 agencies have expended or obligated funds, and Eastern Virginia Medical School, who is the last holdout, is preparing to obligate their funds by December 1st because they have a capital project. On this slide, you can see some of Virginia's largest projects and their status to date. You'll see the amount of appropriations, obligations, and expenditures for these large projects. Virginia Employment Commission, as you'll note, has fully expended all of their SLFRF funds with a backfill to the UI Trust Fund. Also, State Council of Higher Education in Virginia has also expended all of their funds. This slide we have put together.
I'm sorry, could you explain for me why some of these agencies have expended so few funds, like DEQ and Department of Housing and Community Development? What's going on?
Yes, so speaking with DEQ, their projects are all water and sewer projects, and it took a long time to obligate those to contractors. They recently obligated all of their funding, had to go through the bid process, things of that nature.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. On this slide, you'll see that these are kind of the mid-level allocations, if you will. You'll see several agencies have expended all of their allocation, with several that still need to obligate some of their funding. With a follow-up with military affairs, community college service system, and DBVI, blind and vision impaired. Most of those projects are out for bid, and they're expected to be awarded by the end of November so that they can obligate by that 12/1 deadline.
Madam Chair. Adam. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the slide and for the presentation. I wanted to ask, though, about Department of Corrections in particular. If you don't have that detail today, I'd like to know what they're planning on doing with the remaining funds and and what flexibility they have.
Okay, I don't have that right offhand, but they have consistently been obligating their funds. There's no, in my eyes, there's no threat that they won't be able to continuously use those funds.
Okay, and just to follow up, Madam Chair, if you could just let me know, or my office know, what they have been spending on, that would be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Madam Chair, Mr. Rebel. Thanks. While we had a break, I had just two quick questions. First of all, do you have any sense of how our state matches up against other states in terms of obligated versus expended, like whether we're behind or ahead or where everybody else is? I mean, without that kind of context, it's hard for me to understand like whether we're good or bad or what you're telling us.
Sure. I have a slide later. Do you want me to click to that real quick?
No.
Okay.
We'll get to that then.
I'll give you that information. But we're basically we're ahead of other states. We're above the 50% with obligation and expenditure.
Madam Chair, one other question. Thanks. So I know one of the expenditure categories where we allocated or appropriated a lot of money was in broadband. Mm-hmm. But I know also that there's some interplay between the BEAD Act and broadband because we made that advanced expenditure, so then we get to get some of the BEAD money back in a different way or whatever. Can you explain what the interplay is between the obligation deadline and the expenditure deadline in the SLRF or whatever and the BEAD Act, because the two are kind of tied together the way they ended up playing out in our state?
I don't know exactly, but if I can look back to CRF, because we had that same issue with CRF and FEMA funds. Generally what happened is that whichever federal funding pot was to be obligated first, then that would be obligated first. So I'm not sure about any other federal funding related to broadband. I don't know the actual compliance requirements or anything like that. But we do know that this money has to be obligated by 12/1 or it gets redirected. So I'm not sure how that entity would handle that.
I'd like to wait until she completes her presentation
Okay.
for further questions, if you all don't mind.
Okay.
Please continue.
And here we have some of the smaller adopted budgets, less than $10 million. As you'll see, as I mentioned earlier, Eastern Virginia Medical School has not obligated any of their funds, but are planning to obligate all of them. You'll also see DGS has a very small amount of funds obligated and expended. At this point, DGS is unsure whether they'll be able to obligate and expend their funds. I'll talk about what will happen to those funds if they remain unobligated by 12/1. Another one, Fort Monroe Authority, as you'll see, has a very small amount of obligated and expended funds. They have their sourcing bid out, and they are planning to award all of their funds by 9/30. As mentioned, redirection of unobligated funds, you'll find in item 472. 2B, you'll see that $3 million will be redirected to Virginia tourism, and then the remainder to child care subsidy, and that's laid out on your screen there in paragraph B. Recently, last week on September 11th, Secretary Cummings issued a memo to all affected agency heads regarding the accelerated deadlines, reminding them of those deadlines and reminding them of the impending redirection of funds. This has also been shared ad nauseum with our SLFRF reporting contacts as well. So we're hopeful that communication will help agencies understand not only the deadlines, but what happens to that money if it is not obligated by those deadlines. Here you'll see comparison to other states. This information is as of March 2024, which is the latest data available through U.S. Treasury. You'll see in that first column the allocation budgeted. It says 15th among the 50 states, but about 15 of us have allocated 100% of our funding. So we just happen to rank 15th because we're the 15th largest state that received funding. The allocation obligated, you'll see we rank 18th among the 50 states, and we've allocated 90%. With our expenditures, we rank 19th among the 50 states, and we have 61% reported as expended at the March 30 timeframe. In summary, our state agencies, all 42 of them, are managing an unprecedented stream of federal funds. We are working with those 42 agencies on 198 separate projects funded with those $4.3 billion in SLFRF funds, and we'll continue to support our agencies until we are able to report 100% as obligated and expended.
Thank you, Director Simpson. Now, I have Favola in queue. If I don't see you in the queue, thank you. Senator Favola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Simpson, for the report. Question, if in fact some of the agencies or the smaller units, if you will, can't obligate their dollars in time, are there standing funds that could absorb any excess, I don't want to call it excess, any federal dollars that have not yet been expended, but we have a good use for?
As far as SLFRF funds are concerned?
Yeah.
So the Child Care Subsidy program is the largest program that will be refunded, I guess, with SLFRF dollars. So there's plenty of room to absorb that so that we will not send, our goal is not to send a single dollar back to the federal government.
Madam Chair. Well, I would reiterate that's our goal as well, because we have really serious needs in the Commonwealth. We can use the money wisely and make an impactful difference. So I do hope that we don't send any money back.
Agreed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a quick question about the Department of Elections. I saw on slide number 9, you have here that Department of Elections doesn't have any remaining obligations, but they have over half of their remaining appropriations are unobligated. We have this is the biggest election year we have. I'm just curious what's going on there.
So elections was just appropriated $2.8 million in this latest budget. So they received that appropriation on July 1. So this information is as of June 30. So we haven't picked up any of those expenditures quite yet.
Okay, but all the money, further question, Madam Chair? So all that money is going to get spent that's shown in the gray line there?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Now we will hear from Kent Dickey. He is the Chief Operating Officer and Deputy Superintendent of Operations for the Department of Education.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Our last report to you on the pandemic funds that DOE is managing was back in May 23, and of course, much has changed, and we're really in the tail end of all of the pandemic funding sources that are managed by DOE, with primary focus at this point making sure school divisions are making timely submissions of reimbursement for their obligated and spent funds, and a significant amount of daily staffing resources is going to those activities to support school divisions. Just a reminder of the three main sources of pandemic funds managed by DOE. Of course, the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, ESSER. The first two tranches, ESSER 1 and 2, closed out. ESSER 3 remains, and the obligation and spending deadlines are looming for ESSER 3. Those the ESSER funds were on the order of $3.3 billion total, so an unprecedented amount of federal funding for pre-K-12 that came into Virginia under the ESSER program. The Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools funds in 2 tranches. That was $93 million over the 2 grants. And then the major SLFRF grant program appropriated to DOE is the HVAC ventilation grants. That was $218 million. The main feature, as you know, of the ESSER funds are the 90% allocation or reservation of the total grant for school divisions to spend on allowable uses. Those funds were allocated based on the Title I formula. 10% can be set aside for state activities and state administration and divisions critical for their staff, for their cash flow with this magnitude of federal funding. Divisions can submit weekly reimbursements to DOE for reimbursement. ESSER 2, very quickly, that has closed at this point. Very little in unspent balance, under $900 when that was completed. Because ESSER 2 was made available earlier in the pandemic, there was tended to be more frequent use of the funds for immediate pandemic response, as you see in that last bullet, and transitioning to reopening schools compared to ESSER 3 that had more of a learning loss focus. A key feature of the ESSER 3 funding was the federal requirement for school divisions to plan to use and to spend at least 20% of the formula funds for learning loss. That was closely monitored in their local spending plans that were filed with the department. We continue to monitor that in their reimbursements and their subrecipient monitoring and the technical assistance we provide. And in fact, the overwhelming majority of school divisions, 85% of divisions, did significantly exceed that 20% requirement. Typically, on average, across all school divisions, about 40% of their ESSER 3 funds were directed at learning loss and learning acceleration activities. Again, a table here showing patterns and frequency of use between ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. Again, you see the difference in the timeline in the pandemic and returning to school. ESSER 2, again, closed out at this point, tended to be more frequent uses of immediate pandemic response and preparing to return for in-person instruction. ESSER 3, more of a focus on instructional support, student mental health, in-school staffing, learning loss, and chronic absenteeism as students returned full-time to school statewide. Critical timeline related to ESSER 3 as we wind down, and DOE daily is supporting school divisions. Of course, critical deadline is September 30th that looms for the obligation deadline. School divisions have repeatedly ensured DOE that funds are for the ESSER 3 formula funds. The main tranche of funds have been formally obligated by contracts, POs, payroll. The encumbrance period beyond September 30th for final expenditures and spend down last 120 days beyond the September 30th obligation deadline, and there's internal procedures to have that end at the end of December for final drawdown for the funds. And then, of course, absent the late liquidation approach, which I'll speak to briefly, ESSER 3 would close out late January. U.S. DOE, under federal regulations, is offering the ability for states and LEAs to request late liquidation. That doesn't extend the timeline for obligation of the funds, only to continue to use the funds beyond January of 25. and DOE is in the process of sending in a package, like many states are, to request late liquidation for some key dollars at the state level. That would be to continue the statewide reading and math tutoring platforms through the 25-26 school year, upgrade for a critical chronic absenteeism data platform in DOE at the state level. And then we are packaging school division requests, typically to extend use of funds for HVAC or other school facilities upgrades that take longer because they're capital projects and the longer timeline. We're packaging requests from school divisions to go into US DOE. Those need to be in by the end of the calendar year. Many states, including Virginia, will accelerate that submission. US DOE has communicated to states that there's an emphasis on statewide tutoring programs, extended learning time, and chronic absenteeism in terms of the types of late liquidation requests they would like to see come in from states. With where we are now, just a very quick overview of the outreach since the beginning of the calendar year. Directed emails and phone calls beginning in January to June with automated spin down and balance reminders. That increased to weekly spin down reminders, automated emails to school division staff and superintendents in June. In the last couple of weeks, daily directed calls are being made to school divisions to remind them of spin down requirements, provide technical assistance, provide assistance where needed, and literally multiple staff in each school division receive daily grant balance emails sent directly to their inboxes daily on remaining balances. School divisions can also monitor balances on the DOE grant system, the public-facing ESSER website, and then our weekly newsletter is sent out reminders as well. So tremendous amount of staff support and staff resources daily going towards supporting school divisions on spend down of their ESSER 3 funds as we approach deadlines. Emergency assistance in non-public schools. Of course, the initial allowance of those funds was for eligible non-public school support. That window of use of those funds to support pandemic needs and instructional supports for non-public schools in Virginia was a much shorter window. That has now closed, and of course under the federal allowance, available funds under the EANS funds could be redirected to the GEAR program. And of course that was, as you know, directed to the K-12 family and student grant tutoring program on the order of about $70 million for those student-targeted grants of $1,500 and $3,000. Very quick updates on balances and spending as I wrap up, and of course daily we're finding substantial uptick in submission activity from school divisions in sending their online reimbursements in for ESSER 3 and the HVAC grants on the order of tens of millions of dollars a day. And even over the weekend, we saw tens of millions of dollars of submitted reimbursements over our online system. We expect that to continue, and we expect the remaining grant balances for the LEA formula funds and the HVAC grants to continue to decline as school divisions are focused on submission of reimbursement requests and completing spending of their grant balances. ESSER 3, about a $270 million balance as of Friday afternoon. We saw over the weekend and literally yesterday over $20 million just in that short period of time of reimbursements coming in, and we continue to support school divisions to get those in. ESSER 1 and 2 finished with very, very small residual balances, as you see there when they closed out. Just a quick snapshot, as I mentioned, the submission activity for reimbursements is accelerating from school divisions. Just over 3 business days last week, that totaled 21 million. And we continue to see that kind of volume daily, as I mentioned, as school divisions are focusing on their completion of spending and reimbursements to get their balances down. The ESSER state set-aside funds, $61 million balance. Most of that balance, and that has decreased over the last several calendar days as well. Most of that balance is housed in 2 or 3 large-scale statewide grants to school divisions, and we continue to have them focus on completion of expenditures of those grants and submission of reimbursement requests for those set-aside grants as well. Several examples of the set-aside projects, and we've reviewed these with you in the past. Of course, the statewide tutoring platforms in reading and math, where 119 school divisions have made those have accessed those resources. Unfinished learning grants to support the ESSER grants, and you see some of the other key learning loss and instructional support grants and contract uses of the set-aside projects. Another look at ESSER 2 and 3 formula closeout as well as balance on the HVAC grant. The HVAC grant, of course, many of those are capital projects, all funds obligated at this point for those. Those reimbursement requests continue to come in. Those are large-scale facilities improvement projects, capital-related, associated with that grant. And then, of course, related to the September 1 reporting requirement, in red text there related to ESSER 3, monitoring of in earlier months of the ESSER 3 cycle is required by that reporting requirement. The projection by school divisions of actual funds spent but potentially not reimbursed, and then funds obligated, and then the remaining balance of $73 million. And I'll point out that those data points, if collected today, would look substantially different, almost 3 months past the reporting time frame for that data. And that's what DOE is focused on now, is having school divisions get their reimbursement requests for their obligated funds as quickly as possible. Madam Chair, quickly in conclusion, DOE and Virginia are on track for meeting state obligations for fund obligation and expenditure, daily support to school divisions for in getting their funds spent and funds reimbursed. And then we will be filing a late liquidation request for some key state and school division level dollars consistent with priorities communicated by USDOE. So thank you, Madam Chair.
And I thank you. Are there any questions of Deputy Superintendent Kent Dickey? Senator Favola, you're in queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for this presentation. I just want to reiterate a point I think I made earlier with a previous presenter. It is incredibly important that we not leave any federal dollars on the table. We have so many needs in our public schools. And I would hope, Madam Chair, that the Youngkin administration directs as many resources as possible to helping school systems get their requests for reimbursement in as soon as possible, because they have spent some of the money, or they have contractors who are ready to help with student learning and tutoring and all kinds of things that we're trying to implement in an effort to bridge the gap from our post-COVID learning loss.
Yes, ma'am. Yep, absolutely. That is the daily priority. But that level of support, that reach out, that's occurring daily. Just to reinforce, it's absolutely critical. All obligated funds must be spent timely.
Any further questions? Well, then I'd like to take a moment to congratulate Deputy Superintendent Kent for 34 years of service to the Department of Education and wish him a well-deserved retirement. Can we all give him a hand?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. It's a process. Everyone signed off except my wife, and she, apparently I didn't know that was part of the process, but she claims it is. But thank you very much. Really
Enjoy
appreciate
your
that.
retirement.
It's just,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the update on the Transformation Office, and the presenter will be Robert Ward, Chief Transformation Officer, Office of the Governor.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for having me here this morning. It's my first opportunity to present to you. Madam Chair, with your permission, not having presented to this group before, I would suggest perhaps just a very brief self-introduction before I begin my remarks.
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Robert Ward. I'm serving as the Chief Transformation Officer here in the administration. My background comprises roughly 28 years of experience in leadership across commercial real estate, investment, and construction across the U.S. I've also done some work in Central Europe and the Nordics. Last year, in late 2023, I was offered the opportunity to come into a role here in public service, which I embraced. I've been here roughly a year. The first part of my role was consulting and advisory around real estate strategy around the Commonwealth. And then roughly 4 or 5 months ago, I was moved in to lead the Transformation Office, and that's what I'm doing now and have since that point. And with that, I'll begin my presentation.
Well, thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair. First, I thought I would just actually, there we go, pardon me. First, I thought I'd just give a quick overview of the Transformation Office and the role and the work that the team within the Transformation Office does. As I talked to a number of people over the past few months, there's always some points of clarification or some ambiguity. So if I can clear it up in any way, I would love to do so. The mission really is around these first 2 bullets. The idea is to provide program management and support for our agencies, as well as process improvements and bringing expertise both internally and occasionally externally to the table to support agencies with a variety of missions. The tools that we use are really around data analysis, change management, best practices, and when necessary, third-party staff augmentation or consultancy. The data analysis part, I would say, is very, very important. We really start with data and try to use data to drive our decisions and use that as a baseline for the measurements that need to be made. Second, the change management framework is, in the simplest terms, is really the creation of a roadmap, the idea of a structured process to affect change, and for everyone on the team, whether it's transformation and certainly the agencies and the folks involved, to really understand where we are, what we're measuring, and really where we're going and how we'll get there, and having everyone really bought into that roadmap so there's a systematic approach to change. Best practices is an important element as well. Around the Commonwealth, we have a number of best practices across agencies, and we want to make sure those are leveraged. We certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel. And we also will look at other states and other organizations to see if there are groups that are doing a good job around the topic that we're considering, to make sure we bring that to the table first. And then finally, where necessary, if the resources are required for third-party staff augmentation or some level of consultancy, we would bring that in. And then the Transformation Office would form more of a role of managing that third-party group to ensure contract compliance and really delivering on the desired outcomes of the agency in question. Sorry. This morning, I will cover a couple of brief items here. I thought I would start with 2 recent case studies and just give a quick highlight on those, speak to other Transformation Office initiatives and ongoing work. There was a request to speak to the procurement initiative. There was a phase 1, and now there's an ongoing phase 2. And then the current funding status of the Transformation Office, and we can certainly address that. The first of the case studies I thought I would address was the recent work around prisoner reentry. This was really a data-driven solution to a very important human challenge, starting with the data. There's approximately 10,000 individuals a year in the Commonwealth of Virginia that are released from incarceration into some level of supervision. And while the Commonwealth of Virginia has a very good track record statistically there as it relates to recidivism or reincarceration, you still see statistically 1 in 5 being reincarcerated within 3 years, and those numbers go up when you get beyond 3 years. What the data shows us is that if we can provide 6 key things, those numbers can be improved and that cycle can be broken. And those things are, first, access to employment, access to health care, access to insurance, proper supervision, and where necessary, support of mental health and or substance abuse. And when we can provide those 6 support elements, we have a real chance of breaking that cycle and improving these people's lives and their contribution to Virginia as citizens. And if you think about it, across the Commonwealth, we do have these resources, and so it's really been more a function of looking at the data and finding good ways to connect those dots in favor of these returning citizens. Department of Corrections and DSS are both working diligently. They have taken this full control of this program and are driving it forward, and will continue to monitor its results. Next case study would be around Virginia Works, and again, another data-driven project, certainly one all of you are certainly familiar with, certainly with SB 1470 and HB 2195 driving this. One thing I thought of earlier during Secretary Cummings' presentation, there was a very timely comment from Senator Favola here about aligning the needs of our businesses within the Commonwealth with the jobs and the jobs we're creating. And in fact, that is an aspiration of Virginia Works. They are working with VOEE, which is under VEDP, as well as a number of other data sources to understand where the demand is as it relates to jobs, to make sure that what they're producing, what they're directing is really connecting potential Virginians that are looking for work with workforce development opportunities that align with what the market and what companies actually need. And so to the extent they can use that data and connect those in a good way, we can hopefully address those aspirations and train people for the jobs that are going to be available and valuable to them and to the companies within Virginia. Generally speaking, this program has been stood up and is off to a very good start. Again, connecting Virginians with opportunities for development and jobs, and connecting companies with qualified workers here in Virginia. So I think it's a great program. Some other programs that I can touch on briefly, and certainly always happy to take any questions from the committee or Madam Chair. DMV, I think everyone's aware of the work that's been done there. Again, a data-driven project focused primarily on customer experience, lowering wait times, and a number of other metrics that have been addressed over the past couple of years with very, very strong results. From a Transformation Office standpoint, it was early support around leveraging data. And again, continuing to monitor and measure is a really important element in all of these things. So it's not just a one and done sort of scenario. Once these things are ramped up, it's very important to maintain the metrics and to review them periodically to make sure nothing slips back and that we're continuing to do what needs to be done to meet the service levels that our Virginians should expect at any of our customer service centers. Within VEC, again, a similar approach, initially eliminating a significant backlog of unemployment work items. Again, another customer service focused element there. Significant work has been done there, lowering response times to important inquiries from Virginians, and then of course building a dashboard and other database metrics to make sure that we're following up and that we're watching the performance on a regular basis. Right Help Right Now, certainly a very, very important project and one that is ongoing and will continue to evolve and will continue to improve. Quite a bit of good work here, some interesting data, even some new updates this morning. We now have 90 mobile crisis units. There's good work in terms of integrating 911 and 988 to ensure same-day response for citizens that need this support and this help. and they've now broken ground on 4 of what will be the permanent crisis centers working with CSBs around the state. You know, to date, $1.4 billion has been invested and 55 total bills have been signed. So there's a tremendous commitment here, and that's appropriate because it's a tremendously important topic that we want to work on here. There is a potential phase 2 piece that I'll talk about in a moment, something we may look at from a transformation standpoint to support HHR and all the other entities that are working on this. So I'll talk about that momentarily. The Veterans Network is something that DVS has proposed and the Transformation Office has provided some support on over the course of the past year. The idea is a central location for our veterans to find access to benefits or any other support that they might need. Interestingly enough, there's also connectivity here with Virginia Works. We want to make sure that all the veterans in Virginia that have an interest in locating employment or might want workforce development opportunities are able to find that. And so that, along with all of the other benefit information, anything a veteran might want to understand or might need in terms of support here in Virginia, is going to be a bit of a one-stop shop with this hub. So the transformation team helped stand it up. DVS has taken it over, and they're looking at a more formal rollout this fall of that program. A few other items, and then we can get into some numbers. Early childhood care and education was obviously something, a very large, call it team effort here, working with the Building Blocks program, and obviously the $281 million federal funding cliff in the FY25 budget. It was good to see a number of people collaborate on this and protect our children that needed this service and needed this benefit. There was 27,000 children that were at risk, and the result of a good collaborative effort here and some support from the Transformation Office led to a great budget submission and protecting all of these children and their benefits. Final one I'll touch on here is this IT program management, COE, which stands for Center of Excellence. And the thought here is just an early strategic effort on behalf of the Transformation Office in supporting VITA. The idea here is looking forward, there are a number of agencies that have systems that are antiquated, and over time, whether it's in a year or 2 or 10, will need to be replaced. The process of replacing those systems is a difficult one. And for many agencies, it may be something that happens once every 10 or 20 years. So the project management experience that's required to make those changes happen in an effective, efficient, and cost-effective way very often doesn't reside within those agencies. It's not their core mission. VITA certainly has a number of those resources, but not enough for all the agencies. So the premise here and what's being studied is the idea of creating a PMO, or a project management office within VITA, sort of a central location where those expert resources could be available to any of the agencies that were going to embark on one of these, potentially costly IT projects over the coming years. They would have a real, trained team to support them with that. So right now, the outcome is not clear, but that's a study that we're undertaking in conjunction with VITA to help them look at the data, look at how that could be structured, and to see if there's a way to affect that outcome and create the better outcomes for the agencies as they begin to invest Commonwealth dollars in some of their IT needs going forward. Okay, another just perhaps wrap up on a few of the projects here. Again, ongoing projects, I mentioned reentry and Virginia Works. One of the things we try to do in the Transformation Office is obviously help where appropriate, support these agencies to get to a certain point, and then obviously step away. These are not projects that the Transformation Office will take on or intervene or be part of their lives forever. It's a point in time where we're facilitating them to meet a mission and then really handing things over and letting them run with it as they see fit and to drive their agency. So, prison reentry is a great one. DOC has fully taken that over. They have full-time staff working with DSS, and that project's off and running, and they have metrics under which they will review. Procurement phase 2, I'll talk about procurement in just one moment after this slide, so I'll come back to that with your permission. Data analysis and analytical support for deferred maintenance is an interesting one. This is really more of a process improvement question. The DEB has an excellent program actually for tracking the roughly 11,000 buildings that we have in the Commonwealth in deferred maintenance. The thought here was just to look at some analytics around that data that they already possess to provide, quite frankly, this committee and others, just some other views and information from which you can make decisions as it relates to when and how to appropriate and allocate funds for that deferred maintenance. So They've compiled roughly 13,000 lines of data from existing data that DEB has, and it's very good information, and I think they do a very good job with that. This is sort of a bolt-on piece that would give them a little more transparency and help decision makers just understand what they're making decisions on as it relates to deferred maintenance. So that's underway. I'll move down in the interest of time here to projects under review. So as we sit now, the Transformation Office receives a number of requests and inquiries from either agencies or secretariats for potential support. They have ideas, things they would like to work on that they believe would improve their mission. And the first step is for us to really review those opportunities to see if it's something that we think we can help with and if there really is potentially a good outcome for them there. If that's the case, then we would take them on and invest either internal or, if appropriate, external resources and apply them there. These are just a few examples here. I might call out a couple that I think are very interesting. The DMV facility study is really more of a data project again. The commissioner of DMV noted that they have 100 customer service centers, 70 of which are leased, 30 of which are owned. And as they have transformed themselves and evolved in terms of customer service, they want to look at that portfolio and say, do we have the right number of buildings? Are these the right types of facilities to meet the needs of our customers? Should they be larger? Should they be smaller? Could they be configured in a different way? And the other thing from an efficiency standpoint, and was a very good suggestion from the DMV leadership, is, are there some synergies where we could have co-location with other agencies and save money for both agencies because we may have some similar missions? So don't have an answer to that, but the problem statement is a good one, and any agency that has a portfolio of that size is wise to look at it through the lens of data. So we're going to continue to review that and see if there is, in fact, a project there. The next one would be this behavioral health phase 2 potential option. And this is, again, around TDO and ECO, which is a very, very important topic. I think we all appreciate that and ties in very closely with Right Help Right Now. There's a significant amount of work that's gone into this, a number of pilots, a number of great a number of great things have happened in this space, but there's still a lot of work to do. And so the thought here is, could we as the transformation team look at the data, look at some of the pilots and things to date, just from a strictly operational basis and say, are there some other opportunities here that could be proposed, that could be considered? There's obviously tremendous importance in personal safety, the service that these individuals need, the public safety component, and then not the least, the burden on law enforcement resources that's inherent here in order to do the right thing. So it's something we're going to evaluate. We need to really spend some time with it to see if there's something we can in fact offer there. But I think it's worthy of the effort to at least explore the data and see if there's a way to create some at least incremental improvements on that, along with all of the other great projects that are ongoing. And then one other I would mention here is the State Park Enterprise Strategy is just an interesting one that was raised recently from DCR and Natural Resources. And the concept was, could there be a little more flexibility in the curation of retail in our national parks? They have some retail locations now. They have some overnight accommodations. The hope would be to improve those in some way, to perhaps offer some other lines of income to move them closer to self-sustainability. And with all of those funds obviously being redirected into parks to improve visitor experience. So again, a potentially data-driven exercise that could yield some interesting outcomes that could certainly provide our folks in the state parks something to work with or something to consider, and ultimately something to bring to you for further consideration as it relates to their revenue and increasing the experience for our visitors to state parks. Next, we'll move on to procurement. So procurement is in sort of two phases. The first phase occurred in FY24, and at that point, the mission was working with the Transformation Office and the Secretary of Administration and an outside consultant to review the $1.2 billion in executive branch IT and non-professional services spent. So the $1.2 billion was effectively the denominator of which they were looking. A number of methods and tools were applied. What they found were a couple things. One, some things were just simple category management and competition. And by creating more competition or rebidding some of these things, the pricing improved for the Commonwealth. In some cases, there were multiple agencies using the same vendor, but had not been coordinated in the hiring and procurement of that vendor. And so the agencies were paying different rates. And so by bringing some transparency to that, they were able to align those rates. The agency, obviously, that had the most the best, obviously, economics is now what will prevail for the Commonwealth with that vendor across all the agencies. And the result of that was $105 million in identified initial savings. We've now moved on to phase two, and I have a breakdown on that in the next slide I'll show you. The next phase that they've entered into is to look at the $5 billion in other agency contracts, which is roughly 5,000 unique contracts and $5 billion in annual spend. In this case, it's the Secretary of Administration and their team, driving this, using the tools, effectively, let's call it the playbook that was provided from the consultant in phase one. And they've started to apply that to see what savings might be realized. No results to report at this time, but that's an ongoing an ongoing process within the Secretary of Administration's office. This was the breakdown of the savings in the phase one coming out of the executive branch, IT, and non-professional services categories. And again, combination of recompeting items as well as identifying sort of overlaps in contracts where the pricing was not aligned. A couple questions have come up about the pharmaceutical contract. This was strictly naloxone, which you may know by the brand name Narcan, and it was strictly just a recompete of that contract, which will save the Commonwealth $2.6 million on a very important tool or drug for that issue of opioid addiction and overdose. And then finally, last slide here is the current status of transformation funds. This should be consistent with the quarterly reports that are provided from the Transformation Office to all of you. On the left are the activities that have been executed over the past several years, the dollars committed. You'll note if there was a consultant involved or if it was done with just staff. In each case, when we review potential projects, we look through the lens of, is it something that can be done in the appropriate time frame with the existing resources we have in terms of staff, or if it's something that requires an expedited process or more resources in depth that might require outside consulting or third parties. And so all of that information is here. With that, Madam Chair, that would conclude my remarks, and I'm pleased to take any questions you or your colleagues may have.
Well, you have plenty of them in queue, so I'll start with.
Okay. Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Ward. On slide 6, when you talked about the VEC, I'm assuming that some of your work had to do with the customer experience at the VEC. Is that accurate?
Madam Chair, Senator Eben, yes, that is accurate.
And just to follow up, we had at the VEC Oversight Commission heard from former Commissioner Roth several times and her successor. And because of at least at that time, excessive waiting times for people trying to get their unemployment benefits, I had suggested, since a member of the commission had tested the phone line and gotten disconnected when it was just too full to take more calls, that they employ callback technology, like when you call an airline and it says, if you'd rather get a call back, press this button and we'll call you so customers don't have to wait for hours on end on the phone. Do you know if they ever adopted that?
Madam Chair, Senator Eben, I can confirm and come back to you. My understanding is there is this RPA concept that's listed in the third bullet here, which is robotic process automation, which I believe encompasses that, but allow me to confirm that and come back to you.
Okay, thank you. And then, Madam Chair, just one more question. On slide 12, it lists the status of transformation funds, and it says executive search. Was that $550,000 to hire 9 executive leaders? Is that? Am I reading that right with the number of zeros?
Madam Chair, Senator Eben, I believe that is correct. It predates me, and I can certainly provide any other data related to that, but that's my understanding.
Okay, I was just curious if it normally costs $55,000 for an executive when you're hiring them each in the same general sphere. It seems like a lot of money for consultants, and we spent $410,000 to survey state employees. Is that the right?
Madam Chair, Senator Eben, it's the $410,000 was to create a standardized survey with an outside group that creates that. It was not to actually survey the employees. The survey is now available to any agency to utilize and is in a form and a format that could be used and would then, to the extent agencies would have an interest in surveying their employees, this is now a standard tool that's available for them without them having to go out and engage a separate consultant on their own behalf.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Eben. We have 6 more in queue. Senator Deeds.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. There are a number of things you talked about that I found really, really interesting. I'd like to talk some more about them, but I want to talk maybe something you didn't talk about, and that's real estate. It was touched on. What is your job with respect to real estate for the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Sure. Madam Chair, Senator Deeds, forgive me. At this point, I don't have a specific role or an actual role as it relates to real estate. As I mentioned, I was brought on to be an advisor or consultant as it relates to real estate. I certainly have experience in that space. I do not have any authority or direct involvement in real estate at this point.
Madam Chair.
Senator Deeds.
But you did at one point, didn't you?
Madam Chair, yes, sir.
Well, I'm asking about the Department of General Services recently submitted a capital budget request to the governor to relocate the Office of Fleet Management Services, which right now is near DMV, I think, or near the Science Museum. It's on Lee Street. Do you have any idea why they would submit this and what's going to happen down there?
Madam Chair, Senator Deeds, my understanding, the first answer is I don't know exactly what is going to happen down there. My understanding is that there was an inquiry from a private entity under a PPA Act that was rejected by DGS and the administration, and then was resubmitted to, I believe, to VHA. Again, I did not have direct involvement in that, but the hope was for them to potentially purchase the site, I believe, from DGS, VHA that is, and look at other opportunities there related to workforce housing. I've not had any direct involvement of that. I only know it peripherally from some conversations that I was privy to in the spring.
So, Madam Chair,
Senator Deeds.
that property's not been surplus, that deal's been rejected?
Correct.
Do you know of other surplus properties, properties that have been determined to be surplus?
Madam Chair, Senator Deeds, I do not. I have not had any involvement in real estate in probably 5 or 6 months.
Madam Chair,
Senator Deeds.
my understanding is VDOT recently acquired the Owens and Minor building in Hanover and 50 acres of land to move employees from the Randex building. Did you have any involvement in that transaction?
Madam Chair, Senator Deeds, very little at the end of that transaction. I was asked to review the contract documents.
Okay.
The deal itself had already been struck. The negotiation was complete. And Secretary of Transportation asked me to review the documents to see if they would be consistent with a market deal, and that was the feedback I provided.
So
Senator Deeds.
So you would have approved or at least had a hand in what was paid per acre out there?
Madam Chair, Senator Deeds, I had no approval right or authority there. I did review it. I felt that if you're asking my opinion, the economics were very attractive.
Okay. Madam Chair,
Senator
do you know what they're going to do with the 50 acres?
Madam Chair, Senator Deeds, I do not. That would be probably a question I would have to defer you to VDOT or Secretary of Transportation.
Oh, Madam Chair.
Senator Deeds, carry on.
The ABC forecast was inaccurately forecasted due to unrealistic sales growth projections. In March, the general fund transfer was projected to be short $66 million for fiscal year 2026. The former chief transformation officer was involved in that forecast process. What's your involvement in the forecast of the current budget?
Madam Chair, Senator Deeds, I have not had any involvement with ABC as it relates to their forecast or any work since the conclusion of my predecessor.
Okay. That's all I have right now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Deeds. Senator Terrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Ward.
Good morning.
I had two questions, or two sets of questions. One is, you talked at the very beginning about your reentry program, and it appears to me I guess the objective was to try to work across agencies to try to figure out best practices to, I guess, or evidence-based practices, is that fair to say, to try to improve reentry outcomes. Is that right?
Madam Chair, Senator Serval, that is correct. And the data that's on slide 4 here is really the result of a 1-year pilot. So it was a combination of assembling any available data and best practices, as well as an early implementation and sort of a test period of a little over a year to see if there was any validation of that data.
Okay, Madam Chair, for the question.
Senator, so.
Thanks. So one of the best, or I should say, my understanding is one of the more proven reentry strategies or things that have been shown to improve reentry outcomes is the restoration of voting rights. There's been studies done in numerous states that have shown that people who have their civil rights restored are, in New York, I think it was 10% likely to recidivate. Minnesota had likely outcomes. And I'm just curious whether as part of the administration's study, the governor was reconsidering his position on the restoration of voting rights to get back to where we're expediting that as a best practice, which we did under both Democratic and Republican governors before he was elected.
Madam Chair, Senator Somerville, I don't have the answer to that, but I will discuss and come back to you with an answer to see if that was a further consideration from the governor. It was not anything that we dealt with very recently under my tenure here, but happy to look into it and come back to you with some more detail on that.
Thanks. I have one other set of questions, Madam Chair.
I'm not surprised, Senator Silver.
Thanks. Sorry, the other question I had was you talked about procurement. I think you were trying to figure out ways to save money in procurement or make it more efficient, whatever. I just had did you all, as part of your look or examination into procurement, examine at all the administration's sole source procurement practices in terms of whether or not, not putting contracts out for competition produces better outcomes or saves taxpayers' dollars in any way? Because I know there's been some sole source procurements that have happened under this administration, and I'm not sure they were quite as prevalent before.
Madam Chair, Senator Somerville, I don't have that data point. The phase one procurement work took place prior to my arrival, but allow me to spend some time with Secretary McDermott and the team and find out if that was a consideration in the data.
Thank you. I'd just be curious as to how much, whether it's expanded or being used more, or this administration has used it a lot more than others. Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, Senator Silver. We have 4 more in queue: Senator Hashmi, Senator Locke, Senator McPike, and Senator McDougal in the order. That's the way you showed up on queue. Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ward. Just a question about an issue that Senator Eben had already pointed to, and with regard to the hiring of 9 transformational executive leaders for key posts in the Commonwealth. Can you clarify, were these new FTEs that we created, and where are these 9 transformational executive leaders housed? What are which agencies are they working with, and what exactly are they doing? Any clarification you can provide?
Sure, of course. Madam Chair, Senator Hashmi, allow me to come back to you with that specific data. These were exercises that took place close to a year ago. My understanding is an example might be the lottery director being one individual. I don't believe they were new FTEs. It was my understanding, but allow me to please confirm, was that they were replacing openings or other roles that needed to be filled. But I will come back to you with the exact detail on that, and as Senator Eben as well, because he's asked the same question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I have 2 questions, Madam Chair. Yes. One has to do with the governance evaluation for Richard Bland. And there's an indication that a governance report was published on August 15th. Who has access to that governance report?
Madam Chair, Senator Locke, I do not have that answer, but I will find out, and certainly it should be something that can be shared.
Because I would like to have a copy of that report.
Madam Chair, Senator Locke, of course.
Secondly, over the course of the last 3 years, any number of consultants have been hired to help in all of these transformations that have occurred within various agencies. Do you have any idea how much has been spent on the use of these consultants?
Madam Chair, Senator Locke, I have the data before you on slide 12 that would show each of the consultants and their spend. I could certainly come back if you would consolidate that into a by consultant data sheet or something like that, if that would be helpful. The dollars are here, and this is what's reported quarterly by the Transformation Office to your committee as well. Yes, ma'am.
Senator McPike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the presentation, Mr. Ward. One question in relation to the DMV facility study. The 30 locations seems a fairly low ownership rate in comparison to a lease portfolio in terms of a long-term institution. Would you agree that an ownership is usually a cheaper option of the long-term of an institution such as the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Madam Chair, Senator McPike, can you repeat the question? I couldn't quite hear the first part of it, sir.
I believe your stat was of the 112 locations, 30 were owned by the Commonwealth. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And so your background in real estate, would you agree that ownership opportunities are usually cheaper in terms of the long run, in terms of ROI for long-term institutions?
Madam Chair, Senator McPike, I would say generally that is the case. I think the question that came with that was around the utilization of the land and does it have in fact a higher or better use in its current state, and could a transaction be structured where there might be an ownership of a portion of it, but then a portion of it being surplus. We've not gotten into this at all. It was strictly a problem statement that was presented, and so I think it would be a case-by-case decision as to whether the cost of maintaining the asset and land over the long term, generally speaking, that can be better than leasing, but depending upon the use of the tenant and how they operate and operating costs and deferred maintenance and things like that, there are times where leasing could be preferable depending upon who the entity is.
Yeah, follow-up question, Madam Chair. So it's my hope that you share a similar view as I do, that the governments also have some responsibility in terms of when we make site selection and evaluations, we also do so in the context of the small towns that they're based in and the other context of placemaking. In other words, the employees of the DMV or visitors also spend money at shops and other locations relative to some of the locations. There are synergies when we do so and when we make investments, and I'm hoping as you take a look at the study in site suitability, one of those criteria is impacts on local towns and cities versus I hear the phrase often, government needs to operate more like a business. Well, in some cases, that may make site selection at the cheapest land somewhere else away from actual service centers. And that is not necessarily healthy to communities. And so if you're looking at a portfolio in consolidation, I'm hoping the site selection criteria also will include community impact criteria.
Madam Chair, Senator McPike, the answer is yes. Certainly agree with your statement there. There's a number of factors that would go into any site that's owned by a state or a local government, and I certainly understand as it relates to DMV or any other entity, the community impact, the value that can create, the number of patrons or customers that are coming to that every day, and what that impact has on the surrounding community, as well as whether it's retail or other things. So by all means, from my perspective, to the extent we take that on as a project, that would absolutely be a factor in evaluating any of those sites.
I appreciate that, Mr. Ward. Shifting gears. Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to the upcoming project under review, the Behavioral Health Phase 2 TDO and ECO strategy, this has been studied quite a bit by different entities within the Commonwealth, and one of the outstanding issues that I don't think this committee had an answer on was there's relative issues in relation to pay and HR. Last time a member of the administration came up and essentially the DBHDS response was we don't have, that's in HR's court in terms of making the structural HR fixes necessary to reduce the number of human rights violations, the pay and compensation issues, which is exacerbating our state hospital and intake issues across the Commonwealth. Do you have any update for this committee in this regards?
Madam Chair, Senator McPike, I do not. This was a very recent suggestion for a potential project. To the extent it makes sense and could be viable for the Transformation Office to take it on, we would look at all of these factors and look at the work that's been done to date. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the intent at no time is to sort of reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great work that's been done, and we would look to leverage any existing work and see if there's any details or items that we could identify as data points that might help us provide incremental improvement here. But I have no other update at this point on that specific item.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next in queue, Senator McDougal, and then Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Going back to the DMV, I hope as you go through it that the DMV selects are an important part of the conversation, particularly in our rural areas. The selects provide the ability for constituents to access DMV services rapidly and conveniently, and should play a large role in whether there should be other brick and mortar facilities located in those jurisdictions. And the ability to expand selects would be a cost-effective measure going forward and get those services into even more communities.
Madam Chair, Senator McDougall, fully agree with your point. And for full clarity, the problem statement as presented did not have any indication about removal or closing anything. It was much more looking at the portfolio as a whole through data analytics and saying, do we have the right facilities in the right places to meet the customer service. So, the outcome could be a wide range of things, from expansion, could be consolidation, or putting something in a slightly better place to meet the community needs. But everyone starts this, and certainly DMV does, with the idea of understanding who we work for and who our customers are, and not strictly an optimization sort of effort. So there's been no discussion of anything that would move these. It was really more, can we look at the portfolio and does it really make a lot of sense? Let's put the data in one place and just see if it tells us anything. And then, from there, as it relates to creating a, best-in-class customer service organization, are there any other adjustments they might make? For example, they've made some adjustments inside their customer service centers, not changing the real estate footprint in any way, but organizing them a little bit differently. And so that just may be as simple as some of the things that come out of the study, assuming it makes sense to take the study on at all, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ward, thank you. Very impressive presentation, and I thank you all for all the work that you've done. I want to echo Senator McDougall's comment. He stole a little bit of my thunder. The DMV, and I know this was a campaign promise of Governor Youngkin to revamp DMV, and it was desperately needed. And the work that you all have done, I would say, is truly transformational when you can decrease those wait times by like 75%, which is what you've done. And I've noticed it because that's probably one of the things that my office gets the most calls about, are people frustrated. And you go to there's a big DMV in Fredericksburg. It is the most miserable experience you have ever had in your entire life. Now, I've been there for a long time, so it may be better, and I suspect that it is. But in the rural jurisdictions, when you have to drive an hour and a half to get to one of these places, these little DMV selects are great. And you can do certain transactions like you can online. But I just want to compliment you and sort of ask you to keep the pedal to the floor on this. You all have done great work, but I think you can even do more to improve that customer experience, especially for the folks who reside in the district that I represent, which is a lot bigger geographically, and they have a lot farther to drive. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, Senator Stewart, thank you for your comments. Certainly appreciate the feedback, and we'll share that with the teams and DMV and all the people that have really done the hard work here. Your points are well taken. I hope that there's some improvement in the Fredericksburg location that you mentioned. I'll have to look into that. And I can tell you from personal experience that I am a DMV Select frequent flyer, so certainly appreciate the value of those units as well. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. I just want to query to see if there are any further questions. I know this is your first time before this committee, and you've been questioned quite extensively. So are there further questions of Mr. Ward before he takes his leave? Seeing none, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the time. I appreciate your input and feedback. For those that I promised feedback, you will get it shortly. And the one final comment I would make that I intended to make earlier is that, this office is here to help all Virginians. So to the extent any of you have ideas for projects or would like to talk about anything we're working on or talk about something that you might like to see us work on, I would absolutely welcome that conversation and would come to you to sit down and work through that and see if we can deploy some resources to make some more improvements.
I'm sure you will be receiving a lot of calls. Thank you for coming.
Madam Chair, thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, next on our agenda is Janet Larson, Director of DHRM, and she will present on the status of the State Employee Health Plan. Good morning, Ms. Larson. It is still morning, isn't it? Yes.
I believe it is. Good
Yes.
morning, Madam Chair,
Good morning.
members of the committee.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me this morning. I'm pleased to speak with you all today about the status of the Commonwealth's health plan. And just a quick overview. So I'm going to touch on some key messages, an overview of our current health plan, trends that we are seeing, retiree status, and then discussing our resolicitation and goals that we are hoping to achieve with this resolicitation. So some key takeaways, just to highlight, we are seeing our claims starting to increase, but they are still below national averages. We have some charts that I'll be showing here in just a minute. There have been some recent changes in our prescription drug programs that are expected to produce substantial savings to the health insurance fund. There have been requests that we've received over the past year for better dental coverage for our post-65 retirees, and I'll touch on some things that we have recently implemented to address those concerns. And then last but certainly not least is to touch on our self-insured plans and pharmacy benefit resolicitation. So for our current health plans, we provide a variety of plans. Of course, our largest plan is the plans that cover our active employees and our pre-65 retirees. Currently, our plans cover over 200,000 employees and their dependents. We also manage and administer the local choice, which is an optional plan for political subdivisions that prefer to have us manage their health plans. Currently, we have roughly 370 political subdivisions, so local governments, school divisions, authorities that participate in the local choice with approximately 78,000 participants. We also manage the state's Medicare retiree health plan, currently that covers just under 42,000 members, and the Line of Duty Act health program, which currently has just over 3,600 members. In aggregate, claims for these plans is roughly $2 billion a year. As I mentioned previously, we'll talk about our resolicitation. Our current contract for all of our health plans has been in place since 2019. It is a 10-year contract currently. For our trends, we do see for open enrollment, we have a number of employees that make transactions. This would either be changing plans, adding or removing dependents. Of course, our flex spending accounts, by federal law, you have to re-enroll in those each year. So we do see a number of transactions each year with open enrollment. For the current plan year, and our plan year for our active employees and pre-65 retirees, it runs the fiscal year, so July 1st through June 30th. The plan year for our post-65 retirees is the calendar year. For our active employees and pre-65 retirees, we did see an increase in premiums for the current plan year of 6.3%. And then for fiscal year 25-26, those are still under review. This is still lower than the national trend. We are still seeing on a national level a trend of 9 to 10% increase per year. If you look at our 5-year trend, which is on the next slide, you will note that in the past 5 plan years, we've averaged about 2.7% increase over that 5-year period. We had 2 years where we had no increase to our premiums. That was in fiscal year 21 and 23, a 3% increase in fiscal year 22, 4.1% increase in fiscal year 24, and then our current fiscal year of 6.3%. So as you can tell from the chart, we are unfortunately starting to gain on the national trend, but still seeing overall claims below. Whoops, sorry, I went too fast. So highlights, we mentioned our prescription drug plan. We're starting to see some substantial savings there. We did implement for the first time ever in fiscal year 24 a formulary. And this requires the use of generics when there is a generic available. Name brands can still be ordered by a physician, but if there is a generic available, the member will have to pay a higher amount. There is an option for an exception, but the physician has to request the exception to our pharmacy benefit management team to explain why the exception is requested. Our rebates primarily increased, we've seen an increase in our rebates since 2019 of approximately $100 million. And this is primarily due to the contract that we signed in 2019 with Carelon, our current PBM. where we are now receiving 100% of the pass-through for all rebates. Previously, that was not the case. We also have been working with a third-party administrator to conduct a deep dive of 5 years' worth of claims for our self-insured plans. For our post-65 retirees, they did not receive any increase in their premiums for the current plan year, and we are currently reviewing rates for the 2025 year. As I previously mentioned, we'd received some concerns or requests to look at our dental coverage, and we have seen the complaint was, or concerns is that for the optional dental coverage for major procedures, the plan only covers 5%. So if you get a crown at $750, the members are paying basically 95% of the cost. So we did work with our benefit consultant group and with our dental care provider and are able for plan year 25 to offer a 50% coverage. This will increase their monthly premium by $15. And you can see here on the next slide a chart of our claims and our cost for our retirees, our post-65 retirees is also decreasing. Our health insurance fund balance has been very healthy, I would say, for the past 5 to 6 years. Our current balance is roughly $400 million. The minimum balance that is needed to ensure we can pay our claims is $250 million, which we have well exceeded that for the past 6 years. I will say that when our fund balance is higher than we think is needed, we do look for ways to add back, such as offsetting premium increases. So if our actuary says our premium should increase 6%, we may say, well, let's increase 4% and the fund can absorb the rest of the cost. So our resolicitation. So I mentioned earlier we are currently under a 10-year contract for our medical, dental, vision, vision, hearing, and pharmacy benefits. And so there have been questions, why are we now looking to resolicit? We are in the 6th year of our 10-year contract and are at the point where we have 1-year renewals. And so there are a few reasons I'd like to provide as to why we're looking to resolicit now. The first is that we deem that the current contract term is too long. We are seeing changes almost on a yearly basis with market trends within the healthcare industry, pharmacy industry. The landscape is changing, and we believe it's in our employees' best interest for us to remain market competitive by going out for bid now. The second reason is the deep dive review of our self-insured plans has uncovered areas where there's a lot of gray and not concrete expectations of our carriers, and we believe by going out for bid now, we can incorporate some very strict expectations for our carriers going forward that will ensure consistency, best practices, as well as cost savings to the Commonwealth. And the third reason is looking at new and innovative programs. As I mentioned, the landscape in healthcare is constantly changing. We are looking at new models, or to at least consider new models, such as reference-based pricing and values-based programs. And we believe by going out for solicitation now will give us those opportunities to see what our carriers are offering for us. And then the goals kind of aligned with why we're going out for bid now. Again, we want to ensure the best possible networks, coverage, choice, and affordable rates for all who participate in the Commonwealth Health programs. We do expect to see savings, especially around pharmacy. A year ago, we went out for solicitation for our post-65 retirees, and our pharmacy benefit manager changed. And with that change, we saw a 9% reduction in our cost. And if we look out ahead over the next 5 years, this could equate to a $30 million savings. We're also starting to see carriers who did not participate the last time we went out for bid that have already expressed interest in providing a proposal. So again, looking to see what else is out there that we currently are not utilizing. And then finally, looking at savings opportunities. We want our plan administrators to be a plan fiduciary. We want to ensure that CMS is used as the claims processing standard. Currently, our carriers are not using that standard consistently. We also want to require our carriers to always pay lesser of bill charges or contract rate. Today, they're picking and choosing whichever they prefer. And we want to remove the pay for performance. We're finding that some of our carriers are paying higher rates to providers that are based on performance. However, they're not subsequently charging more for those that have poor performance. So we're trying to add a level of consistency to ensure a true values-based program. And with that, I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I have in queue Senator Searle and then Senator Abbott, in that order.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good afternoon, or morning, I guess, still, Ms. Lawson, because we're still at 11:30. Thanks for your presentation. I actually have a lot of questions about this reprocurement. So, first of all, I think you said it's a 5-year contract with 5 one-year extensions. We're either, I guess we're 5 or 6 years in, something like that. And I guess the original contract was procured with the idea that it would likely be a 10-year contract. You know, I haven't received any complaints about the state healthcare plan from anybody, about the level of service, the quality of service, the providers, and of course, if, you know, changing a provider would be a very potentially disruptive move to tens of thousands of state employees and others, the 230,000 people, whatever the benefit from this plan. So I'm trying to understand exactly what led this administration to decide to do this right now. Why this wasn't figured out, you know, a year ago before the one-year reprocurement began. Why today? Why now? You identified a few things, but it's not clear to me. I haven't heard any complaints. So where did this come from? Did this come from within your office, or did it come from upstairs?
Chair Lucas, Senator Searle, great question. A combination of both for the last part of your question. It was conversations with the administration, but also an internal discussion with my health benefits team of 10 years is a long time. Every solicitation I've been involved with was a 5-year term, usually a 3-year contract with 2 one-year renewals. To your point, while we are not seeing or hearing complaints, we find the longer term contracts, our contractors tend to become complacent, and this is an opportunity to see what new programs do they have that perhaps they haven't shared with us. We are hearing about new innovative programs. We'd like to see what other carriers may have those programs. What do our current carriers offer? There's no guarantee that we will be changing carriers. We may have great proposals from our current carriers that are more competitive than what we have today. So it's an opportunity to see what is available, what our carriers are willing to bring to the table, and to be a true partner with us. I will add that the deep dive review of our self-insured plans has uncovered a lot of concern for us in the way that our current carriers have been managing the plan and billing the Commonwealth. So we have incorporated some very specific expectations in the solicitation to avoid those going forward.
Madam Chair, further question. Thank you. I'll get to what you just identified here in a second. First of all, with regard to this change of plan, what steps is the administration taking to ensure that current state employees' preferences are going to be upheld if you all choose a different carrier or there's some big changes in the plan?
Madam Chair, Senator Searle, so anytime there is a change, whether it's in pharmacy, health insurance, one of the things we look at is what we call a disruption report to see, okay, if we're changing networks, if we're adding a formulary, how is that going to change what our employees and our members currently have or receive today? If ideally disruption is low to none, but if there is significant disruption, that would be part of the evaluation process. We would look before making a decision. We're not looking to make a decision that could potentially change the plan for the majority of our employees that would have serious or significant downside effects. We want to ensure, again, that what we have and what we offer to our employees going forward is the best.
Madam Chair, further question. Okay, still not clear to me that you actually are building things into the procurement process that's going to ensure those kinds of things are preserved. I understand that might be like a general objective, but I didn't hear you say that as part of the procurement it's actually going to be preserved. I mean, another concern that I have is that the administration has set terms within the procurement, if I'm not mistaken, that would end up excluding several in-state health insurance plans from being able to participate, such as Kaiser and Centera, because you have set different thresholds than the prior contract had. And so, which from my perspective seems to limit not only participation by in-state carriers, but it seems to limit competition. So I'm trying to understand sort of how you all set these objectives. It just seems like they seem kind of arbitrary. Can you explain any of that? Like why we would limit competition only to the largest national health care plans and not in-state plans? Why we would exclude Centera and Kaiser? Like why the administration chose to put those kinds of terms on the procurement?
Yes, Senator Lucas, Senator Surville. So our goal with this solicitation was to focus on our self-insured plans, which are the plans that provide national networks and coverage. We are not having any concerns with our regional plans, which would be Kaiser and Centera. Now, if they feel that they have the networks that meet the expectations of our solicitation, they are welcome and encouraged to provide a proposal. But our goal wasn't to do the whole scope of our health insurance plans. Again, our regional plans have been in place for a number of years and are operating well without concern by us or our members. It's truly just looking at our self-insured plans where we have more control and that we also want to ensure we offer the best to our members. And right now, I would say roughly 85% of our members are in the self-insured plans.
I'm sure. Further question? Thanks. But I understand that you'd say Kaiser and Centera can send something, but my understanding is the terms of procurement would exclude them because they don't have a reference client that's 50,000 employees or higher. So I'm trying to understand. They can submit, but I think the way the terms of procurement were worded, they're ineligible. So was that intentional?
Senator Lucas Surville, no, that was not intentional. We are not trying to exclude them. We're trying to, again, focus on our self-insured plans and not the fully insured, but in no way were we trying to exclude any potential carrier from participating in the solicitation.
Further question, Madam Chair? Thank you. Sorry to interrupt your coffee over there. Okay, so it sounds to me like the administration is open to perhaps changing the terms of the procurement if there are Virginia plans that are excluded. It sounds like that the administration is trying to preserve employee choices if the plan were to potentially change. It's not clear to me whether that's in the contract. You also talked a moment ago about how concerns have been raised about how the self-insured plan is being administered, I think you said, or how claims are being paid, if I'm not mistaken. My understanding is that your agency hired this company called 4C via a sole source contract to go and do some analytics of its claims. And I'm curious, like, why you all chose to pick this 4C entity via a sole source contract instead of procuring it. I have friends that operate in the healthcare space. I reached out to them about it. They said the services offered by this group are not innovative, they're not unique. There's lots of people that do it, but the administration decided to make a contract with this one specific entity to look at this problem. Can you explain how that decision got made?
Chair Lucas, Senator Surville, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask my Director of Health Benefits, Gary Johnston, to come up. He was here when this sole source was approved by DGS. I was not here at the time.
Okay.
So Gary, if you don't mind.
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Senator. As Janet mentioned, I'm Gary Johnston. I run the Office of Health Benefits for DHRM. In regards to the contract with 4C, that was actually done through sole source. It was set up through DGS. And I mean, it's a completely independent process for which DHRM is not involved whatsoever. It is completely up to DGS. They went through the review process and they made the determination that 4C, with their proprietary software, met the obligations of being a sole source vendor.
Madam Chair, further question. My understanding is the contract with 4C is a contingency-based contract, which my understanding is highly unusual, that we would give a contractor sort of a piece of the action. In other words, give them some kind of a reward, their fee based on what fraud or whatever, what mispaid claims or whatever their so-called proprietary algorithm would provide. I mean, has DHRM ever had a contingency-based contract on any other contract for any other service that you're aware of?
Madam Chair, Senator, I am not aware of any. What I can tell you is we went into this, it is a very unique and it is an innovative project that we have going on here with 4C. They have provided us with a lot of excellent data for us to use and to understand how healthcare administration can be done more efficiently. And when we went into this project, we weren't sure and we weren't able to pin down, okay, well, how much money and how much in opportunities of savings do we have for the Commonwealth? Well, without being able to do that, because again, it's a very new concept. And what they do actually is very unique compared to a lot of other vendors.
Madam Chairman.
And the reason why we went into it and did a percentage of savings is because then it ends up being a win-win. Because unless they save us money, they don't get paid.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, isn't it accurate to say that you've actually sat on panels with either the employees of 4C or the CEO talking about their services in forums that 4C has actually set up itself, that you've sat on their forums?
I have attended a conference, yes.
Okay, you were actually, further question, Madam Chair? And you were on a panel that they put together, right?
Correct.
Okay, Madam, further question, Madam Chair? So is that just like a coincidence that you appear on a panel and then they get a sole source contract? I'm trying to understand exactly how that happened.
As far as Madam Chairman, Senator, I had nothing to do whatsoever in the sole source process. I have no control. I had no decision-making in the sole source process.
Madam Chairman, further question. It's my understanding that the chief legal counsel for the organization is former Congressman Robert Hurt, who I think just left Liberty University in order to work for that company. Do you have any idea what Mr. Hurt's role in the procurement might have been?
Mr. Hurt was not there at all during the procurement process. He wasn't even an employee of 4C at that time.
Okay. Okay, last question, I guess. So, again, as I know, maybe we have a difference of opinion about this, but again, I reached out to a friend of mine who does a lot of healthcare stuff. He's done very well in it, and I asked him if he ever heard of 4C, and he said that what they do is not unique or unusual. There's lots of other companies that do it. Is there some reason that you all just didn't put this concept out for other companies in America or Virginia or wherever to come in and offer alternatives instead of just deciding this is the one and only company we're going to go pick? Is there some reason you all didn't do that?
Madam Chair, Senator, when we reviewed it, this came through us. Actually, we got referred to the 4C through the Office of the Attorney General. That's who had made the contacts. They came through us. We talked to them about it. And when we looked at the services that they provided, it is different than what your friend might say, is they do offer a very unique service. And the way that they run claims and all of our administration through, their software package, it is unique. And what it does is it then develops opportunities. Basically, it shows us all these different buckets of opportunities that we have that can be significant cost savings here for the Commonwealth and for the State Health Insurance Fund. So that was the decision.
Madam Chair, sorry, I forgot I had one more question.
Senator Sarable?
Sorry, it's my understanding that this process they went through identified something like $200 million of claims that were shouldn't have been paid or something like that. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but if in fact they did find $200 million of mispaid, whatever it is, it's my understanding that we haven't been told about that. It's quite a bit of money. Is there, A, is that accurate? And B, why haven't we been told there were $200 million expended that shouldn't have been?
Madam Chair, Senator, Those were the initial numbers that came out from 4C. And again, what you have to keep in mind is those are opportunities. And when you go through and you review those opportunities, you got to take a look at them and take them against the actual contracts to say, okay, well, out of this amount of monies, how much of that can be enforceable according to our contracts? And we've been in the process with our carriers. We've been dealing with them now for about 2 years going through this whole process. It's a very labor intensive. And right now, we are actually in the process of dealing with our carriers. We have about $55 million right now that is on the table right now for us and as Ms. Lawson had mentioned, in regards to, it really comes down to some certain services, which are, always paying that lesser of billed or contracted rate, which does not happen all the time. Like we've seen instances where the carrier would pay 95% of the time, they're going to pay the lesser of to one provider. Well, then there's another 5% of times where they choose not to. And that's where we're reviewing and analyzing with those carriers on, okay, well, why aren't you doing that? And then, it comes down to contractual obligations. And to date, they have yet to be able to show us those contractual obligations that would allow them to do that kind of stuff. Another one is also, we do a full reconciliation of accounting, for claims in and out of Anthem and Aetna and all of our carriers. And right now, to date, we have a discrepancy of about $5 million that we're working with them on, and they still have not been able to provide us proper documentation as to why there is that variance. So that's why we're working with them on that one as well. All right, and then the last other major bucket that we're working on is timely filing. Providers have a certain amount of time to file claims under their contracts. And we've identified a lot of monies that appear to be paid outside of the contractual allowances. So this is actually an excellent project for the Commonwealth and for the state HIF, because it is not only hopefully going to provide us with some monies that can help out with the HIF and offset costs, but most importantly, it's going to help us going forward, because now we have all this information on, hey, what is the best way to administer claims? We can hold carriers accountable, make them use, as Janet mentioned, use CMS as a claims processing standard. Because right now, and I hate to say, I've been in healthcare for 30 plus years. I even started out processing insurance claims. And there never has been a general standard across the board for all health insurance carriers to follow, but hey, this is how you're supposed to process health insurance claims, because it does make a difference. Depending on, just some examples are certain modifiers that you use with anesthesia, depending on how you do it, it ends up costing us money depending on how they process claims. So it really is some excellent information that's going to be very useful for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I could ask more questions, but I appreciate your tolerance. I'm going to get downstairs to a meeting I got to get to at 11:30. I'm overdue for. Thank you. Thank you for answering my question, Mr. Johnson, Ms. Lawson.
Thank you.
Senator Evans and then Senator Favola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a bit of a statement question for the first one, following on Senator Servo, and then another question. The first point I wanted to just ask is, are you, the way the contract is being procured now, today, people in Northern Virginia and I guess the Centera region as well could lose their current option for health care? Is that if their company is not qualified for what you put out for bid, could they be precluded from having Kaiser as a choice in Nova?
Chair Lucas, Senator Eben, absolutely not. So we are not, the solicitation we have on the street today has no impact on our two fully insured plans. So
Okay.
The Kaiser and Centera plans are untouched. They're not impacted by this.
Great. Thank you for that. And then I wanted to just follow up on reference-based pricing, which I understand is inducements for lower cost care to be selected. Is that something that's part of this contract or this procurement?
Senator Lucas, Senator Eben, we have included language encouraging innovative programs, and we have identified such as reference-based pricing and value-based models.
Okay. Yeah, Madam Chair, I had not heard of reference-based pricing until I read about it in Project 2025, but my concern is that it could, from just on the face of it, I don't know a lot about it, but I was thinking that if you give inducements for lower cost care, people could choose, you know that saying, you buy cheap, you get cheap, that it could discourage people from choosing the health care that is most needed for their particular circumstances. So just something to keep in mind.
Senator Lucas, Senator Eben, I appreciate that, and I will say too that just because we've included language in the solicitation doesn't mean we are going in that direction. We just want to see all available options, and then the evaluation committee will determine what truly is in the best interest of the Commonwealth employees and retirees.
Okay. Well, thank you for your work and for your presentation.
Senator Favola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a comment. Thank you for having this nice conversation with us. Hope you're enjoying it. 2 points. I know that reference-based pricing really is a cost containment model. That's what it is. As is the value-based model. That's cost containment as well. It would be, I think, in the Commonwealth's interest to ensure that our employees have choices. Not everybody is going to be motivated by a cost containment model. There are things you trade off under the cost containment or a capitation rate. You know, you often have a gatekeeper, a healthcare professional who's a gatekeeper. Somebody else is weighing in more heavily on your healthcare decisions than the consumer. And our ultimate goal, I hope, in providing a healthcare benefit to our employees is to try to present many options, because we've got many different needs and desires, but it's also a sort of a recruitment and retention aspect. And we should be proud that we can offer options, that we can give folks an opportunity to really, insure themselves and their families in a way that meets their needs. So I would caution you about just using cost containment as your motivating factor. We're well below, our rate increases are well below the national average. It's actually remarkable what we're doing, but I'm not naive enough to think that we're not sustaining some trade-offs for that lower rate. And that's my statement. So, and I thank you for coming and sharing your expertise with us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry, Senator Lucas, Senator Favola. First of all, thank you so much for that. And I want to assure the committee members that we are not looking to replace or take away choice for our members. If anything, we would be adding choice. So again, this is not to replace and diminish what we have. We've got a lot of great programs in place. We do have a good selection of choice for our employees and their families, and we're not looking to change that, but I greatly appreciate your statement. Thank you.
Any further questions? I thank you for your presentation, both of you.
Thank you all so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Well, we have no other presenters, so I'd like to remind members that the next committee meeting is scheduled for October the 15th at 9:30, and the annual meeting is November 21st and 22nd in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And I see we've lost some members because they're going to other committee meetings, so I'm sure that they will become aware of those 2 meeting dates and times. So if there's no further business, committee will rise.
Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.